You're listening to Bigger Than Belief, real stories about real faith with real people whose belief is unbelievable. I'm your host, Adam Duxter. Thanks for listening to Bigger Than Belief. Today is Thursday, April 16th, and if you're like me, you've spent the last couple of weeks locked in to NASA as we watched a crew go further from Earth than any other human has before. Eventually, they circled the moon and returned safely to Earth. Awesome splashdown there. The mission a resounding success. But what stood out to me, and maybe you too, was seeing all the pictures of our Earth from outer space, seeing the moon, all the things like that, and that feeling of smallness, stillness, and connectedness that those pictures really gave you. Essentially, zooming out by a million on our Earth and putting everything into perspective. If you felt that way at all, you're not alone. In fact, some of the astronauts on board felt that same way. Astronaut Victor Glover made headlines on Easter Sunday when he said this, quote, "Whether you believe in God or not, this is an opportunity for us to remember where we are, who we are, that we are the same, and that we have to get through this together." It was a remarkable quote, and it was a remarkable blend of a scientific feat mixed with a simple faith. It really stood out to me. It got me thinking, how do our faiths and our sciences intersect? And I mean, can they even? Something as simple as where the Earth comes from. Both science and faith have explanations for that, but who's right, and can they both be right in their own ways? That's why I'm so excited about the conversation we're going to share for you, because for the first time, we welcome an astrophysicist onto Bigger Than Belief, perhaps the most qualified person we could find to talk about this exact topic, because for years, Dr. A.J. Poelarands was studying space and creation himself. His work as a scientist brought him from the Netherlands to the U.S., but eventually he began asking, why does space exist just as much as how it does? That's when he went back to school pursuing a degree in theology. And in the years since, he spent over a decade as a professor of astronomy and physics at Wheaton College in Illinois before coming to Minnesota to be the director of faith and learning at the Anselm House. We'll get into that too, about his current role and what he's up to. But for the next hour, we want to share his thoughts on the universe from an astrophysicist and theologian hybrid. We talk about creation, life after death, why we're here to begin with. It is a fascinating conversation. I'm really hoping you're going to enjoy it. So now, without any further ado, here is Dr. A.J. Poelarands. Well, we now welcome on a very special guest, someone who I'm really excited to be sitting across from. We joked in the newsroom today, the first astrophysicist, if you will, that we've had on Bigger Than Belief, Dr. A.J. Poelarands. How'd I do there?
That's pretty good, yeah.
With the last name.
Yeah.
Dr. Poelarands, thank you for joining us. This is a really cool, exciting conversation, and the reason you're here. And so I appreciate it greatly. But for people who don't know you, which is the majority of our audience, what is like your quick bio of who you are and kind of how you got to Minnesota?
Yeah. So I'm an expat, so to say. I grew up in the Netherlands, so that's where my accent is from as well. And I studied astrophysics in the Netherlands, so I'm a physicist, astronomer. Came to the United States about almost 18 years ago, first to work at Los Alamos National Laboratory as a research scientist for a couple of months, and then switched from astrophysics into theology, studied theology for 4 years, and then came to Chicago, the Chicago area, taught physics and astronomy there for 11 years at a Christian liberal arts college called Wheaton College. And then 4 years ago, my family and I moved up to the Twin Cities. So I've been moving from the warm south, Los Alamos, to St. Louis, to Chicago, and now to kind of like the cold north. And that's how I got here. So working at a place called Anselm House, which is a Center for Christian Thought at the University of Minnesota, helping students and faculty and staff to think deeply about what does the Christian faith have to do with your studies, with your scholarship, with your research, with your teaching. So that's a very short bio. Yeah.
But the reason we really were excited and wanted to have you on and have this conversation is, I don't know about you, but I think our whole newsroom has been geeking out watching these astronauts in space on this Artemis flight circling the moon, the farthest anyone's ever been away from planet Earth. Have you also been geeking out? I mean, how closely have you been watching just kind of what these folks are up to and what we've seen from space these last few days?
Yeah, I love it. I've been watching it. I've been watching spaceflight basically almost ever since I was like a young boy, so to say. So spaceflight has always been part of my interest. And then when Artemis came up a couple of months ago, and then they moved it back again to the hangar, and now back to the pad again, I've been following all the progress of the mission itself. And then obviously when they go out in space and they fly around the Earth and fly around the moon and you see the pictures, that's just amazing. So it's very exciting what's happening there, very exciting the progress sort of that we've made from the Apollo era, right? So that is like the 70s, so that's like 40, 50 years ago to where we are right now. We're able to do the same thing again. So for many, many years, we're not able to do this actually, go back to the moon. Now we're able to go back to the moon again. We have actually the capabilities to get up in moon orbit, even though we're not in moon orbit yet. And that's super exciting to be able to do this kind of things. And so the excitement is both kind of like human spaceflight, that we're able to leave the Earth again and are able to go to the moon. And then the other excitement is kind of the curiosity and the awe and the wonder that people experience, not only in the spacecraft itself, and you can read lots and lots of accounts and you can listen to them when they see what's happening, when they see Earth, when they see the moon, and they're just in awe about what they see. But even on Earth, right? People on Earth resonate deeply with these kind of experiences and with this kind of sense of like, this is who we are. We are on this Earth. It's very, very small in the whole vast space, so to say. But we're able to do these kind of things. We have the technical capabilities to go to the moon, to look on the Earth, to go as far as we've never been before, so to say. And just to, like, that sense of like technological progress, which then also lead to a sense of awe and wonder about who we are as human beings. That's just fascinating, that kind of combination.
And it's been interesting too, because you mentioned for the people on the spacecraft, it's awe-inspiring. And I feel like as we tape this, the second week of April here, they're still up, we're going to splash down, here, not too long from now. But we've heard from some of the astronauts on board, and particularly astronaut Victor Glover, who spoke on Easter Sunday and gave a kind of a impromptu quote about faith and belief and spirituality that really resonated with people. But you even mentioned the Apollo flights. I was looking, and I didn't realize this, on the Apollo 8 flights back in the 1960s. Astronauts were going past the moon, and they were reading out of the book of Genesis, talking about creation. There's been this connection, if you will, between astronauts and space flight and faith and belief now for, like you said, over 50 years. Why do you think that is?
Yeah. It's a very good question. So to a certain extent, I think you can say that all of us as human beings are spiritual beings. So when we are confronted with something that is bigger than ourselves, something that's more beautiful than ourselves, something that's vaster, something that kind of really touches our own heart and our mind and our emotions in a way that we've never experienced it before, we start thinking about like the transcendence, so to say. And so for a lot of people who grew up in the Christian tradition, that is God. People who grew up in the Muslim tradition, that's Allah. Jewish tradition, that's the Abrahamic God as well. And so there's this deep connection with kind of spirituality and with like a transcendent being that comes out for a lot of people. And so what you see then is that people are trying to find words to capture what actually is happening there, to capture what they're seeing. And the words that they find in the Holy Scriptures. They find in their holy writings, whether that's like Islamic writings or whether that's Jewish or Christian writings. That's where they find the real words that capture what they're seeing right there. And so you go back to Genesis, and they start reciting Genesis, or they start reciting Psalm 8. Oh Lord, how wonderful you've made all of this. And so those are the words that people are grasping for, because those are the words that express what they actually are experiencing inside themselves.
It's interesting because your career, we were just talking about it before we sat down and taped, it almost lines up with a lot of this in exact parallel, where you spend all these years doing scientific research, and then at some point you say, I want to study faith.
Yeah.
What was it about the research you were doing and what you had learned and what you had seen that prompted you to say, I want to study theology as well?
Yeah. So I did grow up in a Christian family, so Christianity was always part of who I am. But when I studied astronomy and physics as an undergraduate student in the Netherlands, I really wrestled with these questions. And the main question for me was, does it actually make sense? Does what I believe, what I grew up with as a Christian, does it actually make sense with what I'm learning about how the universe is made, the processes in the Big Bang, the things that we know about how the universe actually works, the natural laws, and all these different kind of things. And so I had real big questions, like are these reconcilable? These two worlds that I'm in, the world of Christianity and the world of like the sciences. And for a while, I didn't think they were reconcilable. Obviously, the cultural story is there's a big war between those, right? Between faith and religion, or between faith and science. And so you hear that and you kind of experience that in your own heart as well, that war, so to say. And so you think it becomes more and more real. And so it became kind of like this dichotomy in myself. Like, I don't know how to bring my faith and the things that I'm learning in the sciences together. Until there was kind of a switch and I said like, no, like it actually does make sense. And it's really difficult for me to explain what happened there. It was a spiritual experience where God kind of broke through some of those doubts. And I said like, no, in the big picture of my Christian faith, all those questions that I have, they actually find places. Doesn't mean that those questions are gone. Doesn't mean that I have all the answers for that, but they have a place somewhere. And so from that moment on, I had something like, I want to know more about how as a Christian I can think about those kind of things, but I also want to know more how as a scientist I can think about those kind of things. And it was kind of like my Christian faith became an invitation to go deeper into the questions in Christianity and deeper into the questions in the sciences.
You anticipated going into this, like there will be some things that contradict each other. Like my faith will be contradicted when I learn more about science, or my science will be contradicted maybe when I learn more about faith, but it wasn't. It was it was a different experience you had.
Yeah. So initially, yes, right. So you feel kind of like this contradiction between faith and science, but the more I learned about science and the more I learned about my Christian faith, and eventually it actually made perfect sense. Like you can be a Christian and be a scientist. You can be a scientist and be a Christian. I found a place for my Christianity in my science, and I found a place for my science and my Christianity. They actually worked together, and it was almost like a mysterious, like a spiritual experience where the whole landscape opened up for me again.
You talk about these big questions. Let's dive in. Let's start with the beginning.
Yeah.
You talk about science.
Yep.
Where do we come from? You know, you learn. Every kid learns. Even I went to public school, and it's there's a big bang. There was nothing. Then there's everything. The Bible talks about creation at length. There is an explanation for how things happen. It's the very beginning. If you start reading it, what does the science say, and what does your faith say? And is there a place for them to coexist about the start of the universe?
Yeah, very good question. So science, the story of science, obviously is like a story of the Big Bang. Like everything came into being through kind of like this. People talk about it as an explosion, but it's not really an explosion. It's kind of an event that creates space and time, so to say. And then everything kind of starts expanding through all kind of physical processes, eventually becomes more and more complex. You get the nucleosynthesis, so elements are being formed. And then you get the formation of the first stars and the first galaxies. And eventually you get to a place where the galaxies are complex enough and there's enough like chemical elements that you can actually start forming life and those different kind of things. So planets and then eventually life. So that's kind of like the scientific story, and that's a great story. And it's a story that I've been studying for my whole astronomical career, so to say. My work was in kind of supernova explosions. So how do supernovae create the chemical elements that we all need to be able to support life and to have life here? And it was not only the kind of in the generation of our own stars, but it's actually going all the way back to the first generation of stars, the earliest stars in the universe. So that whole story is actually a story where science tells us a lot about how this universe actually works, how it actually all hangs together. And And science has made big strides, so to say, in explaining those kind of things. But does it really explain everything? And that's the big question. Does it make sense in the whole like who we are as human beings, so to say? And so that's as a Christian, the way that I come to those kind of questions is like, if I start from kind of a beginning point where God is the creator of everything and everything is created by God and through his kind of like his power and is created for him. That's the way that Paul, the Apostle Paul, talks about it. So God is intimately involved in his creation. So that's the way that I think about it. God is like created everything. Everything was created for him. Everything was created by him. And God is still involved in every aspect of this creation. How does this story that science is unveiling to us, how does that fit in there? Now, one of the things how it fits in there is that in one of the things that we don't understand in the sciences, maybe yet, maybe eventually we'll get there, but at the moment we don't understand. And I don't want to say that that's God, because that will be kind of what we call a God in the gaps. But like, how does this universe itself come into being? Like, what's the beginning of this universe? Where does the universe itself come from? So that's a real big question. How do you get from nothing to something? And astronomers don't have an answer for that. Now, is that God? Maybe. In a Christian story, it actually makes sense that there is something that God has created, those kind of things. But as a scientist, I cannot go back to that point and say, like, that's what God did, so to say. So I cannot deductively go back and say that's what God did. But as a Christian, I can say it makes sense in the Christian story. Mm. And the same is true for example, like a couple of years ago, I was at a conference in astronomy, like an astronomy conference, American Astronomical Society, San Diego, a big conference right there. And within that conference, there was a small mini conference about the fine-tuning of the universe. So this universe is extremely fine-tuned. And everyone recognizes that, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, everyone recognizes that this universe is extremely fine-tuned.
Meaning what?
So all the laws of physics are tuned towards each other so that there actually is life possible right here. But not only that, it's also the ratio of all the kind of like the constants in physics. So what is the mass and the charge ratio of like an electron and a proton and those different kind of things. But it's also how much dark energy is there and how much dark matter is there in the universe. All of those kind of like ratios and quantities are in such a way, the way that we understand it right now actually, in such a way tuned that if it was a little bit different, this universe would not have been here. Mm. And everyone recognizes that. So the fine-tuning of the universe is a real big kind of mystery for most astronomers. So there's a couple of solutions for that. Some people say it's just as it is. It's a brute fact. We don't have an explanation for that. It's not really an explanation, right? But that's a belief, right? Like, I just believe it's a brute fact. There's no real good reason for why we're here, but we're here. Mm. So that's one argument. Another argument is, like, we are part of the multiverse. So there's maybe billions and billions of other universes. And all those other universes have different universal constants, different laws of physics, and those different kind of things. And we just happen to be in a universe where all the constants are correct and where they're right for life to emerge eventually. Or, so that's some people believe that we're in computer simulations of an advanced civilization. That's a little sci-fi, so to say. Or the other option, and that's where the camp that I'm falling in, is like, what if there's a God who created this universe in such a way? And then it kind of makes sense that this universe is so fine-tuned because he made it in such a way that we could actually flourish here. That there are actually human beings who live on this earth, who are able to love each other, able to communicate with each other, and all of those kind of things, and have all the rich experiences that we have as human beings, like loving and caring for each other, and even a sense of awe and wonder and connecting with the transcendence again.
Going back a step to what you just said, though, when you learn about how many things have to go right for Earth to exist, for life to exist on Earth, I feel like sometimes people take it for granted. You know, like I wake up, I have my job, I have my car, I have my commute, and it's easy to get kind of lost in that. How much, when you were doing your studies, are you realizing how rare, and you kind of touched on this, but how many things had to go right for this to happen here? I mean, can you help put it in perspective?
everything had to be right. So that is all the laws of nature as we know them, like the strength of gravity, electromagnetic force, electroweak force, electrostrong force. All of those forces had to be tuned towards one another in such a way that this universe could be here. But not only that, you need to go back to kind of like the foundational, like ideas of what the universe actually is, the way that space and time relates to each other, the way that quantum wave functions in the early universe worked, the way that even the structure of the universe came into being, so that there are areas where where gravity is a little stronger, and so we can actually create galaxies and those different kind of things. So every little thing in the universe needed to be right. So there's an English mathematician, Roger Penrose. He wrote a book in the 80s or so, something like that, pondering this whole idea of like the fine-tuning of the universe. And he approached it from the perspective of entropy. Now, entropy is a complicated topic in kind of thermodynamics and physics and things like that. But it talks a little bit about like the amount of possibilities that you can have and the amount of ways that you can actually create a universe. And kind of like, what is the area of what he called in the phase space, like all the different possibilities that this universe could be different. What is the area of this phase space in the entropy phase space that needed, how big does it need to be for this Earth to be right here, for like to have an Earth that is suitable for life? And he did some calculations, and I think if I remember correctly, he got to a possibility that is one in 10 to the power of 123. So that's an 1 with 10 to the power of 123 zeros behind it. So there's not even a way that you can express these kind of numbers, how fine-tuned this universe is. And so he thought about this, and he had I don't know what to do with this. This is the creator had to aim his pin at a tiny, tiny little area in what he calls the phase space to be able to create a universe that makes the flourishing of life possible.
I mean, I've heard it. I'm going to get this wrong because there's a reason I'm in this chair and you're in that chair, right? Science was not my jam.
Yeah.
But I remember even in high school and college, something about if the Earth was this much closer to the sun or this much further away from the sun, like Earth would not be able to sustain human life.
Yeah. So that's the Goldilocks paradigm, so to say. So if Earth is a little closer to the sun, you get too warm. If Earth's a little further away from the sun, you get too cold, and so there's ice and those different kind of things. Those are real arguments, so to say, for where we are in our own solar system. They're real arguments that become really important for when we think about extraterrestrial life. Is there life somewhere else in the universe? And where around potentially other stars can life exist? And to a certain extent, these are also fine-tuning arguments, but they're fine-tuning arguments that are more contingent on where we find ourselves. So Earth 2.0 somewhere else could be even in a better position than where we are, for example. Like totally possible. But when you go all the way back to the foundational constants of our own universe, you can't really tweak those kind of things. Like the Earth can be a little closer or a little further away, and life could be more flourishing or less flourishing. But when you really start messing with like the foundations of this universe and what really needs to be true for life to be here, that's a fine-tuning of a totally different order.
It's going back to the story of creation. I think for people who have been, if you are a Christian and you've been to Sunday school, you're familiar with the 6 days of work and the seventh day of rest, right? Do you read those passages where it's, the day one, nothing, everything. Day two, light and dark. Day three, now we're separating the water from the land. Do you read that literally? Do you feel like, oh, that's a metaphor? Is there a balance, where you say, okay, this is what science, could tell us about this? How do you interpret the story of creation just beyond the spark that starts it all?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I studied theology, obviously. So I've studied like the Genesis story. I've translated it from Hebrew into the English language and things like that. The way that if you read Genesis 1, especially Genesis 1, it reads as a narrative, right? With days and like day 1 and day 2 and day 3, but it also reads like a poem almost. And so the way that I describe it, and I got this term from one of my professors, is kind of an elevated prose. It is narrative, but it's elevated. It's more styled, so to say. And so it's a very unique genre in the scriptures in that sense. And so when you read the Hebrew scriptures and when you want to interpret them, whether you want to say, how do you interpret this? It depends what kind of genre it is. So for example, if it's poetry, you generally don't have to read it in kind of a very literal fashion, like this is exactly telling truth after truth after truth. This is how it happens. You read it more metaphorically. You read it more impressionistically, like this is what it does to my heart, or this is what it wants to teach me. It's kind of wisdom literature. But when you read a narrative, for example, about King David or King Solomon or whatsoever, it's a very different way of reading it, because it's the author himself or herself claims that that they give like an historical account of what happened there.
This person was that person's dad, who had that person, who had that person, who had that person. Yeah.
So the Genesis narrative is styled as a narrative, like an historical narrative, but in an elevated way. So it kind of gives away, like, there's something that happened here. You should take this as historical, like God did certain things. He created the heavens and the earth. He created light and darkness. He created plants and human beings and those different kind of things. So he created those kind of things, but it's on an elevated level. It's kind of, there's a poetry involved, so to say. And so you read it, so the way that I read it is like, yeah, I do believe that God is involved in all of those acts of creation. But it doesn't mean that the text says, like, AJ, like on day 1, this has happened, on day 2, this is exactly what happened, on day 3, this is exactly what happened. The text itself, the way that it's structured, gives you then freedom to say, like, it's something happened there, God is involved with it. But the way that the author structured it is also, there's a wisdom and an imagination that comes out of that, in the same way that poetry speaks to the heart. So the way that I see Genesis 1, it's this opening up your mind and opening up your heart to the beauty of God's creation, to the importance of God's creation, and especially the climax of the story itself is the creation of human beings, right? Who we are ourselves and who we are ourselves in relationship with God. And so there's lessons to be learned from Genesis itself, Genesis 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 as kind of like the whole total of the creation story that go beyond like did it happen in this way and this way and this way? Was this the sequence? So I'm actually not so interested in the sequence itself. I'm more interested in the bigger story and the bigger meaning that we can derive out of that.
So it's like you said, it's not as much of a narrative of fact as it is, like you said, it's what it's meant to do. In your heart as you're reading it. Is what you believe. In
your heart, but also in your mind. Like, you can interrogate those stories with reason. Right? It's not like, oh, it's only impressionistic in my heart. Like no, you can actually ask real questions from these kind of stories, questions about who are we as human beings? What is God trying to tell us about who we are? So created in the image of God, created to steward this earth, created to love each other and to care for each other and all of those kind of things. Those are real things that are really grounded in kind of like who we are as human beings, so to say. And it's not only, and so there's real questions that you can ask there. It's not only like ethereal ideas.
Are there other places in the Bible, for example, where you can look at that and say, this is where the science checks out to explain some unexplainable things? I feel like there's a number of instances, whether it's, the wise men following the star, right? Or the day the sun went out, right? Or even as we passed Easter Sunday, people talk about the earth shaking, right? And just the what happened, during the crucifixion from a global sense of what is happening in the world. Are there other places where you, as you were getting this degree in theology, you say, I want to go there and figure out if the science checks out?
So yes and no, because my kind of like default instinct is not so much anymore like, does science kind of like negate or kind of like say like religion doesn't work anymore, or does religion say like the science doesn't work this way anymore? I don't see them at war with each other. But there are moments, and maybe this is an interesting story. So in my own story, the resurrection actually was very important. So maybe this is the way to talk about it. So when Jesus rose from the dead, so we just are past Easter, right? And the Easter story itself is where Jesus, as a dead person, right? He had been in the grave for a couple of days, and there's no question about that Jesus was dead. He rose again from the dead. That doesn't happen, right? It doesn't happen that dead people become alive again. Certainly not after 3 days. And so that was a real deep question for myself. Like, AJ, what do you do with this as a scientist? Like, what do you do with the story of the resurrection? So it's either like the Bible is right here, right? And Jesus did rise from the dead, or science is right and Jesus never rose from the dead. That was a pivotal moment in my own life. I was probably somewhere in mid-20s or so that question came up to me. And so it became the question, AJ, what are you going to do with this? Is the Bible right here about the resurrection, or is science here right about what happened, like Jesus is still dead? So someone who was very helpful for me was the British theologian N.T. Wright. I don't know whether you've ever heard of him, Tom Wright. He has done a major study in kind of like resurrection, in the resurrection. So he studied Jesus' life, but especially he wrote a big book, like this big, about Jesus himself and his resurrection. Like what happened during the resurrection, and what did the people in that time believe about the resurrection? And his contention is that as an historian and a theologian, when he goes back to all the sources and tries to figure out like what happened on the day of the resurrection, is that the resurrection is true. And if the resurrection is not true, then there should not be a Christian church. But there is a Christian church. And so if the resurrection, and even Paul says that, right, in 1 Corinthians 15, he says, like, if the resurrection did not happen, then our faith is totally worthless. And so as a Christian, I believe that the resurrection happened, and kind of the evidence, and I don't really like using this word for that, is that there is a Christian church all over the world. There's billions of people who actually believe in Jesus Christ and his resurrection from the dead. And it's kind of like pointing back to this first day of the resurrection. And so the fact that there is a Christian faith and that Jesus did rise from the dead, according to what he said, was for me a moment where I said, like, okay, Jesus rose from the dead. What does that mean now for my science? Right? Because it doesn't happen. Like, dead people don't rise from the dead. And so that was the moment that I realized, like, well, maybe my science needs to embed it in a much bigger worldview where resurrection actually does make sense. Maybe science is not the final answer to everything. Maybe the Christian faith has a bigger understanding of reality, a deeper understanding of reality, where the resurrection actually can take place. And so if we as a scientist just study naturalistic processes, resurrection would not happen. But if the reality that we live in is bigger than just nature itself, maybe resurrection can happen. Now, and then it actually makes sense again. Even the creation story itself, right? Like that God creates something out of nothing, that there's human beings who are created in his own image and those different kind of things. The fine-tuning of the universe, the fact that we are people who have awe and wonder when we see kind of like creation, beautiful things in this reality. All of those kind of things fall in their places then, because this story, the naturalistic story, and the natural world that we live in, are embedded in a much bigger world where all of those things actually fall into place.
Do you feel like within the scientific community, you like to have that belief that, well, maybe, my science, shouldn't, my faith shouldn't fall into my science worldview, maybe it's vice versa. Yeah. Do you feel like there is a stigma as a scientist to hold that belief or to give up a portion of yourself and say, maybe this isn't for me to figure out? I mean, have you experienced that at all?
Yeah, there have been moments where people said, like, AJ, you're crazy. Like, why do you believe in those kind of things? So I've certainly had people say those kind of things to me and kind of like ask, like, why do you do this? Like, why do you believe this? But at the same time, there's also people in the scientific community, and especially in astronomy, who are very open towards spiritual experiences, where people have this sense of awe and wonder. But people look at pictures of the Hubble Space Telescope and the James Webb Telescope, and have sort of like, this is amazing. Like, why is this? Why is this so beautiful? Why does it touch my heart so much? That's a real experience. Most people who go into astronomy are not going in astronomy because of the physics and the intricacies of those different kind of things. Most people go into astronomy because they have a love for space. They look up to the night sky, and they look up and they see that at a really beautiful, like August night, lying on their back in the grass, and they're sort of like, this is like what is up there? Who are we? How big is this? What is beyond the stars? So there's real big questions. That's why people fall in love with astronomy. And they keep those kind of questions. Studying astronomy on a physical level doesn't diminish those kind of questions. Sometimes makes those questions actually even bigger. And so what I've seen in astronomy, in the world that I'm in, is that reluctantly sometimes, but people are open to those kind of questions. People are open to, like this is crazy. Like I don't understand something of this. So even Carl Sagan, right? So I don't know. Have you ever seen the movie Contact? With Jodie Foster, Matthew McConaughey.
Little bit before.
Yes, yeah. So okay. Carl Sagan obviously was quite critical of the Christian faith, and was kind of like the science popularizer of his day and age. But when he wrote the movie Contact, there's this one scene in there where Ellie Arroway, played by Jodie Foster, floats around in space and sees the celestial events. And Ellie Arroway exclaims like, no words. They should have sent a poet. And so she has this experience that goes beyond herself, this experience that is almost transcendent. And a lot of astronomers, I would say, resonate with that. They see the pictures of outer space. They see astronauts. They see Earth down below themselves. They have these transcendent experiences. Don't really have a place to kind of like put it in, so to say, or make sense of that because they don't have the language for that. But there isn't like a connection, an immediate connection between like astronomy and the bigger questions and looking up in the universe. And then there's something beyond there. And so people are open to having those kind of conversations in astronomy, which is fascinating.
The one thing that I wanted to ask about in particular, because we've talked about creation, right? In the astronomical, the astrophysical, connection. But how often in your studies did you think about life after death? And how often did that come up? Because I think people have this view of heaven, if you will, if you're a Christian believer, and people have this image where you're up in the sky, up in the clouds, right? How often do you think about life after death or heaven? Or is there anything that your science and your faith coincided with when you're trying to wrestle with that big question where maybe we don't know a lot about it?
Yeah, so we don't know a lot about heaven itself, right? The scriptures tell a little bit about that here and there. It's kind of the place where God lives. So to say, that's the way that kind of like the scriptures talk about it. There's a sense in which when people die, you go to heaven. But no one knows exactly what it is. One of the things that we do know from especially from the end of the story of Revelation is that when you die, it's not the end. So that's one of the things. Like when human beings die, it's not the end of their lives. And there is going to be a day when the way that the Bible talks about it, when heaven and earth are going to be combined. So what we now experience as maybe separate realms, so our earthly existence and kind of the heavenly existence where God kind of lives and the angels live, that is eventually going to be combined. And God actually will live with us on this earth. So there's going to be kind of like this crazy earth where people will be living on, which is going to be beautiful and amazing, almost like the Garden of Eden was this idyllic kind of like thing that Genesis 2 and 3 talk about, and 4. That's going to be restored over the whole earth. How that's going to happen, I have no idea. But there's this sense that God is actually going to live with human beings. That's kind of like the end of the story. That's where the story goes, the story of the Bible. So where earth and heaven are separated right now, and where God and human beings are separated right now, eventually, because of the work of Jesus Christ, all of it, that is going to be united, where God is going to live with human beings, and human beings are going to live with God in kind of like this realm, in this earth, so to say, where there will be no tears anymore, and where everything will be good. And there's a sense in which we are kind of longing for that, right? So we are if you think about who we are as human beings, all of us are longing for justice. All of us are longing for that things will be right again, because we see so much ugliness in this world. We see so much misery in this world. So we have this longing for something that is better. And the Bible talks about it, that is going to be fulfilled, that deep human longing of who we are and what we're actually hoping for, that is going to be fulfilled one day when God will live with his people here on the earth, when everything will be right again. That sounds a little bit like a fairy tale, and maybe it is, but it actually is the reality, the way that the scriptures talk about it. So how often do I think about it? It kind of colors my life a little bit, in a sense like that gives me hope. It helps me in the sense of like, yeah, I know that is going to be the rest, that's the end of the story, and it helps me to live my life right now with hope and with courage and pursuing already some of that, pursuing justice, helping to kind of like bring some kind of redemption and push back against some of the misery and the ugliness in this world. Because there's a reason that there's going to be a day that things are going to be restored again.
I think the thing that I keep coming back to as far as a question is the why. Why? If you can explain, the Big Bang or our universe or the solar system, right? We live in a galaxy with this many planets, and this is what we know. And after a sense of it all, you have to ask yourself, well, if I understand it, why? Why is any of this here? And you've studied both from the scientific side and from the faith side. What can you tell us from what you've learned?
So from the science side, we don't know, right? So you go back to kind of like the multiverse or the brute factor or scientific or a simulation in the advanced civilization. There's no real reason why we would be here. There is not, right? So as a scientist cannot say this is why we are here. There's no real reason. There's no moral or purpose. There's no overarching picture of like, this is where we came from and this is where we're going. So there's no real kind of argument to be made there from the science side, which is kind of like sometimes nihilistic, right? So it leads you to a very dark picture or maybe not. So it kind of challenges you like, what are we going to make of this world? And so we're going to make the best world out of it. So we're going to make technological advances to be able to, even in our own world that we live in, to make the best of it. So that's kind of like all you can say as a scientist if you don't have this bigger perspective. And and I support that, right? I think as human beings, we do need to work towards a better world. But what I think the Christian faith adds to something like that is a bigger picture, a real why, a deeper why, and a deeper why that actually resonates deeply with kind of the reality that we live in. And that makes sense again of like why we are here, but it also deeply resonates with who we are as human beings and why we feel what we feel. Why do we long for relationships? Why do we long for justice? Why do we long for beauty? All of those different why do we long for spirituality? And so the deeper reason there, and again, going back to the Easter story, right, where I realized that my science is embedded in a bigger story, in a bigger reality. That bigger reality is a reality of God himself. The Trinity, so the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the way that the Christian scriptures talk about it, who are eternally coexistent with each other, loving each other, almost in a dance, where there's beauty, where there's deep relationship, where there's deep commitment. In a way that's like we use human language for that, but it is beyond human language. And that relationship and that existence of the Trinity, of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, is spilling over, so to say, into this earthly realm. When they created together, when they created this whole universe of all the beauty in it and all the intricacies in there and all the stars and the galaxies and all these different kind of things, their love and their beauty spilled over into kind of our earthly life. And so Adam and Eve, as the first human pair, they experienced it. They walked with God in the beauty of the day, or in the garden, and they saw his beauty, so to say. And they were in deep relationship with each other. And so that relationship of Adam and Eve is a reflection of the relationship of the Trinity itself. And so that gives a real deep meaning to our human existence, right? Our human existence is not like this natural material existence, but it's embedded in God Himself, so to say. The way that the Greek philosophers talked about it, and the way that Paul pulls that in as a quote in Acts 17, in Him we move and live and have our being. So it's from a Greek poem where the Greek poet actually realized there's something deeper going on. There's a deeper reality that we're part of. And Paul says that's what the Greek poets talk about there. And I forgot the name about who actually said that. Paul says, in Him we move and live and have our being. That's God Himself. And we all experience that. He's actually arguing at that moment with the philosophers in Athens on the Areopagus, which is where all the philosophers would hang out the whole day. And as a Christian theologian, he's arguing and kind of talking with the philosophers there on the Areopagus. And he says, what you guys believe already about this reality, in Him we live and move and have our being, this is actually real and deeper and finds a deeper meaning and a deeper purpose in the God who actually created this whole universe. And he points then towards the Christian God who created this whole universe. He talks about creation, and then he talks about Jesus Christ Himself as well.
I'm sitting here just very, very, very intrigued with what you're saying, trying to wrap my head around. I feel like my brain has exploded a couple of times just from the science portion of it alone. I am curious, though. I mean, do you feel like Christianity is the only way to explain these things? Because there are so many other faiths that exist, and they all offer their own take. I mean, how confident are you that Christianity is the way to explain it? Well, why not something else?
Yeah. So let me say yes and no. So let me say first a yes. So the way that Jesus Christ talks about Himself as the fullest revelation of God Himself. So that's Jesus came to this earth to reveal to us who God is Himself. And He talks about Himself as, I am the way, I am the truth, and I'm the life. No one can come to the Father than through me. And so to a certain extent, I would say, yes, I think the Christian faith and Jesus Christ is the fullest understanding of this reality. That doesn't mean that other religions and even non-religions like science have a lot of things that are actually true and good and beautiful, and we can learn a lot from them. So we can learn from the sciences. There's so many things that we can learn from how science works, how this reality works, that we can actually take, and that reveals something about the reality that the Christian faith actually doesn't give us, so to say, and that actually enriches then the Christian faith. We can learn from Muslims, we can learn from Jewish people, we can learn from Buddhist people, we can learn from Confucius, we can learn from indigenous traditions, even here in our own area right here. All of those see parts of the truth, sometimes even things that we as Christians don't know anymore or don't have anymore. And so I believe we can learn stuff from every other human being who is living right now or who has lived before. There's beauty and truth and goodness to be found everywhere. But when it really comes to kind of the fullest grasp of the truth, personally, that's my personal commitment and my personal belief, that is most fully revealed in Jesus Christ.
I want to go back to Artemis one more time.
Yeah.
Just because they're still up in the sky.
Yeah.
What is left to figure out or understand when you're looking at space and the things we know and the things we don't know? Because obviously this is a scientific mission. I mean, they're doing interviews and there's a lot of fun and NASA's done a good job, I feel like, of making it feel like a reality show in some ways, but this is like a fact-finding mission for them. Yeah. When you look at space and the things we're trying to figure out, the things that we're close to figuring out maybe, what are the things that excite you the most?
Yeah. So Artemis itself is a mission to kind of test our own technology. Like, can we still do it, right? We were able to go to the moon. Are we still able to get back to the moon? And what are the technologies that we need to be able to get there? And to a certain extent, testing the technologies, and then it's an expensive photo op to kind of create some excitement for what we are able to do as human beings. So that's one. So testing what we can do. There is a sense of curiosity, right? And kind of like, where are the boundaries for us as human beings? Like, what can we do? And that is something that has always driven us, right? We as human beings are curious beings. And we are always looking for the boundaries and always trying to figure out like what is next and what is next. That's why we came over from Europe to the United States, because we wanted to know what is going on there. That's why we went in low Earth orbits in the 60s for the first time. Like, can we actually survive in outer space? That's why we have a space station right there going around the Earth for like 10, 15 years already. That's why we're going back to the moon. And so there's a sense of curiosity. Like, what is there? That sense of curiosity then reinforces that again, because there is a sense of wonder, right? The pictures that are coming back, the testimonies of the astronauts about what they saw there, how they see kind of pale blue dot again, Carl Sagan, and how vulnerable all of this is, right? So you float over the atmosphere of the Earth, or you're on the other side of the moon, and you see this really tiny little Earth there. The sense of vulnerability becomes very, very strong. The sense of this is our home, we need to care for it, becomes very, very strong. So that immediately then goes back into kind of like, how actually do we care for this Earth, right? How do we make sure that we're not messing it up and destroying it? So there's all of those kind of, and I think spaceflight reinforces that. Then the next step, the next frontier is like, what are we going to do with it? Are we going back to the moon? And what are we going to do at the moon? So to a certain extent, the main driver for all of this at the moment is resources on the moon. There's metals, rare earth metals on the moon that are easier to dig up on the moon than here on the Earth. And so it's almost resource extraction. So we're going to take the moon and bring the stuff from the moon, bring them back to the Earth, so that we can actually make more stuff that we sometimes that we need and sometimes that we don't need. So that's the next step. Our curiosity goes further than that, right? Our curiosity maybe goes to Mars. Like, can we reach Mars eventually? And what do we need for that? What is the technical skills? What is the equipment that we need to go to Mars? And then there's really big questions that actually need to be asked. Like, do we actually need to go to Mars? Right? So why are we going to Mars? So there's maybe 2, maybe 3 reasons why we can go to Mars. One of them is curiosity. Like, we are still explorers and we want to push the boundaries further and further and further. And so Mars is the next frontier. We've been to the moon, so the next frontier will be Mars. So that's one. So the next frontier. Are there chemical elements on Mars that we can actually use or that we can bring back to the Earth? Now, that's going to be quite difficult, because to get to Mars is a long journey and to go back to the Earth is a long journey. So it might technically not even be interesting to do something like that, to kind of use Mars for resource extraction. The last one argument that has been made quite a bit, especially by Elon Musk, is like, we need Mars as a lifeboat. Say we are going to destroy this Earth, whether that's through nuclear weapons or something like that, or a cosmic accident, like there's going to be an asteroid that destroys the Earth, like it destroyed the Earth when the dinosaurs died, for example, 65 million years ago.
Side note, yes or no on that? Asteroid, Earth, dinosaurs?
I think so.
Extinct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we know where it actually landed, like in Yucatan, Mexico.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah. At least that's what most people think. So we need to have a place where we can go, that if we see like an asteroid coming towards us, that we actually have a lifeboat, an escape place where we can bring some people who then will escape this inferno that's happening here on the Earth. The challenge with all of those is that Mars is a very hostile place. And to really make a place where you can flourish on Mars is going to be much, much more difficult than here on Earth. And so if you think about really Mars is the next frontier where we maybe can form colonies and start living on Mars and things like that. Especially if you think about like we're going to destroy this Earth, then I would say it's actually much more important that we actually keep this Earth livable and inhabitable than that we try to create something that's really incredibly difficult to live on Mars, where we never will be really flourish, where we never will be able to go outside, walk around on the Mars soil without any equipment, because it's just a hostile environment for us. So the Artemis mission is kind of testing some of this, is a test bed for kind of like new technologies, it is a test bed for what do we need, what kind of skills do we need. The next step is obviously going to be the moon. The next step after that might be Mars. But like the ethical questions become bigger and bigger and bigger. There's obviously already a little bit of an ethical question around your resource extraction of the moon. But then the ethical question to go to Mars, is it worth spending billions and billions and billions of dollars to be able to go to the moon and then to Mars, potentially risking hundreds of lives as well, right? This is not an unsafe expedition or something like that. Is that worth for what we think we need to do there? And is it worth for going? Is our exploration worth like this amount of money and this amount of potential human lives? That's a big question, and I don't know. Like personally, I'm a little bit more skeptical about this kind of thing. So I would say let's make sure that people here on Earth can flourish. Right? There's so much poverty. There's so much misery. There's so much diseases that are here. What if we use maybe a portion of that money to actually eradicate some of the diseases here and eradicate poverty here on Earth so that we can flourish here instead of finding a lifeboat somewhere else? But those are big questions that I think as humanity we need to start wrestling with. And I think the Christian faith actually provides the resources to be able to speak into those kind of things again. Like, who are we as human beings? Should we go there? And what is our motivation for living our life here on the Earth?
Last kind of I could talk to you all day. For the sake of your time, I do want to somewhat consider time, but I am curious what you would say to someone, because I feel like there have been a lot of people who have seen these images, these new images of Earth, and we've never seen it quite like this. I mean, even the cameras we have, and they're seeing these images of Earth and space, and they're thinking things they've never thought before. They're asking questions they've never asked themselves before. The train is kind of thought is going for them. There's countless people who fall into this camp. What do you say to them?
Keep thinking. Like, look at those pictures and don't shy away from the questions that you're asking yourself, right? So there's a sense sometimes in our culture that we don't want to go deeper, and we kind of say like, oh yeah, those questions, like, they're kind of nagging me a little bit, but like science tells me this and something like this. And like, no, pursue those questions. What you see there is real. You see the Earth. You see beauty. It impresses a sense of wonder on you. Pursue those kind of questions. And who can help you? Then the next question is like, who can help you to pursue those questions deeper? Where do you need to go? Who are the people who are able to speak wisdom into a situation like this? Who can help you to pursue what you're longing for here? So if you're captured by this wonder and you look at these images, you're sort of like, this is so beautiful. Like, who are we? Like, why are we here? What is this Earth for? Like, maybe science can help you answer some of those questions, but maybe the Earth religions can help you answer some of those questions. And so find a religious person who can help you to wrestle with these kind of questions. There's ages, like thousands of years of wisdom in the religions on Earth who have wrestled with those kind of questions. And I would say, like, as a Christian, like, I love those kind of questions, and I want people to come to me and say, AJ, like, can we talk about this? Can we think about this? What do you think about these kind of things as a Christian?
Are there any good resources or books that have been written or places where people, if they want to take maybe the first baby step, but, many people are not, to the scientific level where they want something so heady, so to speak. But any good resource you could recommend people, even if they just want to take that next step to learn about science or science and faith, or anything that you feel like, a book, another podcast, a video, a movie, anything you feel like you'd recommend people check out if they are a little bit more curious?
Yeah, that's a good question. So just to understand the beauty of all of this Earth and this universe, there's PBS documentaries like Planet Earth and those different kind of things that really impress the beauty of this Earth and of this creation on you. And everything in that sense needs to start with this sense of like beauty and wonder and sense of like, who are we? And the deeper those kind of human experiences are taken seriously, the more you can actually start searching. So personally for me, a book that was very helpful is again Tom Wright, a British theologian. He wrote a book, Simply Christian, about 15, 20 years ago, with the subtitle, Why Christianity Makes Sense. And that book, that was actually super helpful for me in my personal kind of wrestling with these kind of questions. As I said earlier, like this question, like, does Christianity make sense in light of my scientific training and things like that? It was a real profound question that I was wrestling with. And N.T. Wright, in that book, Simply Christian, was able to help me to really work through some of those questions. I've had a lot of help with Tim Keller was the late pastor, Tim Keller, and pastor in New York, who wrote 2 books, Making Sense of God and The Reason for God. The Reason for God is his first book, kind of like explaining why should you believe in the Christian God? And then the second book, Making Sense of God, is like all those kind of like what he calls the feeder beliefs, ways why you should not believe in the Christian God. And he wrestles with these kind of things. So he was a pastor, like the center, downtown New York. So many kind of critical people and skeptical people came to his church that he was wrestling with these questions over and over and over again. And so he wrote those up in those 2 books, The Reason for God and Making Sense of God. And those books have been very helpful for my personal journey as well. But to a certain extent, it comes down to relationships, and it comes down to taking your own questions seriously, and especially those questions that make you long for something more. Because so often we dismiss those kind of questions, but if you feel a longing for kind of like deeper relationship, a longing for beauty, a longing for wonder, a longing for something transcendent, a sense there's something more beyond what we experience, these are questions that you should take seriously. And there are people who are willing to help you. So walk into a church, ask for the pastor, see what the pastor is willing to help you. Pick up some books at the library. And I would have said Tom Wright, Tim Keller, there's lots and lots of other authors who take these questions very seriously. Yeah.
How can people get connected with you? I mean, if people hear this and they want to follow up with you, they have questions, I mean, what's the best way people can find you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I work at a Christian place called Anselm House, a Christian study center at the University of Minnesota. So I work mostly with Christian faculty and Christian graduate students to help them think deeper about what the Christian faith actually has to say and has to offer to their own kind of research. But I'm always happy to talk with people. And so they can send me an email. My email address is ajp@anselmhouse.org. And so you can find it on on the website for Anselm House. I'm happy if people want to talk deeper about these kind of things, to talk about those kind of things. I'm part of a church as well. And so I'm happy to talk with people or take them to church if they want to. Because I think these questions are best explored in a relationship. It's not something that you want to explore by yourself, just like on the couch with a book or whatsoever. The best way is actually exploring them through a relationship where someone is kind of like guiding you through those kind of questions and helping you to wrestle with these kind of questions.
It's been fascinating. I mean, I could listen to you talk all day, and there's so many more things I'm sitting here even thinking of. Maybe it'll be a time where we come back and hit on a couple of questions, but just an awesome conversation. I feel like, especially like we said, as we're watching Artemis, hopefully safely by the time this comes out, make a return. Yeah. And it just garnered rather so much national attention. Thank you for taking time out of your day to come talk to us. And it really was really cool to learn from what you had to say.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking time to listen to Bigger Than Belief. If you're brand new here, we do this every single week. Real stories about real faith and real people. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please give a moment to go and rate this podcast 5 stars, because it really does make a difference when you do that. And if you've been a listener for a while and you like this episode or just any of our episodes, please, in the app, can you drop a review for us? Because that helps us, again, be seen by way more people than you might realize. We are playing to the algorithm, but we are hoping that by liking and sharing and reviewing and rating this content, it'll help even more people see it. Folks, we'll be right back next Thursday with another brand new episode. But in the meantime, please be well, and we will see you soon.